What was a fact taught to you in school that ended up being disproven during your lifetime? Cracking your knuckles causes arthritis. So I'm good. Yep. Edit. Apparently I needed to highlight the last sentence as many seem to miss that one. Smiley face. He won an Ig Nobel Prize for that. Indeed, and back in the Journal of Irreproducible Results days, when an Ig Nobel Prize was for research that cannot or should not be reproduced, and not the Annals of Improbable Research's Ig Nobel Prize, which are for research that first makes you laugh, then makes you think. When I was a kid, the giant squid had never been captured or photographed, and some people talked about it like it was El Chupacabra. My little brother always said he'd be the first person to get footage of one. Sadly, it has since become an ordinary animal that we know exists. Rip the kraken. I've seen the preserved corpses at the Smithsonian. It's pretty fascinating to think no evidence existed until our lifetime. That's the crazy thing, though. There was evidence, but it was so speculative that it only fueled the imagination. Sperm whales had scars that were clearly made by the claws on squid tentacles, but they were so large that they couldn't be linked to known species. So all we knew was that these whales were tangling with something huge and tentacled. I remember being fascinated by that tidbit as a kid. I believe they had also previously found the beaks of digested giant squid in sperm whales' stomachs because they don't break down, so that was the other way we knew they existed. I feel defeated knowing I'll never be as badass as those whales who actively hunt the things that hunt them. From an educational film strip, Saturn has for beautiful rings. The Voyager photos of the thousands of rings had come in like a week before we watched this. You should see James Webb's pictures of the planets. Holy sh. Darn, that James guy is good at getting photos. How does he do it? Really good camera? It's out of this world. Food pyramid. Most foods aren't even shaped that way. But pizza is HMMMMM. Confirmed food pyramid, a scheme from Big Pizza. Your tongue has different areas for tasting different tastes. Sweet on the tip, sour on the sides, bitter in the back. EDC? I feel like this was some elaborate prank played on my generation, but I remember seeing this in my elementary school biology textbook. I don't even think it was disproven. Like, they just stopped telling this lie. WTF? Hey, I also remember learning this in school, so it's a lie. From what I have read, more like a game of telephone, study results got slightly distorted, and then changed into a graph which didn't have meaningful numbers, which lead to an illustration, which got repurposed, that an illustration got put into textbooks for years and years. Okay, I have a yellow-dinged fluorescent 2000 to first grade memory seeing the posters on my way to the cafeteria. Both were tongue diagrams and had conflicting information with the other. Bitter taste buds will take up the whole middle of the tongue, but in the subsequent one, bitterness is on the sides, towards that exact middle thorax of the tongue or dislike for. This was the peak of No Child Left Behind in a public elementary school. We used to joke that if they held us all back, no one could get left behind. That I was going to be offered free Ds all the time. Halloween equals free edibles and LSD. God, I wish. I had a teacher in 4th grade that would force left-handed kids to write with their right hand. She said that it was the normal way to write and would benefit them later in life, circa 1974. When I left-handed was learning to write, my teacher at the time tried to force me to be right-handed because she won't have the devil in the classroom. I was moved to a different class after my mom got involved. The South. My brother was forced right-handed by my grandma who thought the same thing. She tried doing the same thing with me until my mom found out and quickly put an end to her. Nonsense, it really wasn't just a South thing. My grandma was PA Dutch. It's much older than that. The Latin word for left is sinistra, and ultimately the word sinister comes from it. Since ancient times, in a number of cultures, the left hand was seen as weaker, unclean, any number of worse things. I remember learning that left-handedness was considered bad, because back in the olden days when swords were still common, people would shake hands as a way of showing they weren't going to attack. Because most people are right-handed, this was pretty reliable. But left-handed people were considered untrustworthy because they could, theoretically, shake your hand with their non-dominant hand and then stab you with their dominant one. Interesting to hear it goes farther back than that. Guess humans have always been dumb about that's different than them. So many things, the lifetime of facts is shorter than you'd think. Among them, you use 10% of your brain was in a textbook. Model of the atom, what composes a healthy diet, various histories from how dinosaurs looked too. What life was like in the Middle Ages, causes of ulcers, poor vision, acne. The atom model was a fun one. The physics class I had in high school had 3 of them. And the last one had a disclaimer that basically said this one probably isn't right either. Haha, I'm almost closer to the birth of the Bohr model than to its end. At that there were no disclaimers, but we did have real planetary models that you could pull apart. The Bohr model isn't wrong per se. It's still useful in some contexts. The electron cloud model is more accurate, but the Bohr model is still very good at predicting interactions between elements. It's why they still teach it. The electron cloud model was first proposed in 1926. It's not new by any means. It's just the Bohr model is easier to understand and still useful in a lot of contexts. All models are wrong, some models are useful. I have an education in classical mechanics which serves me quite well despite all of that quantum nonsense that's literally over a century old. Newton got us to the moon, not Einstein. Are you intentionally trying to get my generation riled up about Pluto again? Lol. Right. Pretty sure it was everyone's favorite planet as well. As if. It was everyone's favorite planet when I was in school, when I was 12. My class actually attended a lecture from the scientist that killed Pluto, and the entire audience of hundreds of 12-year-olds booed him off the stage. Lol. I love how personal this is to our generation. You won't always have a calculator in your pocket. Little did they know that you have a supercomputer in your pocket, 247 that you just can't effing look away from. I possess a device in my pocket that is capable of accessing the entirety of information known to man. I use it to look at pictures of cats and get into arguments with strangers, Ian Leslie. And sometime I crimp my finger over the camera like so and make a fart sound so people look at me confused, while I snap a picture that ends up looking like they just became aware that there's a nude person approaching them. Pompei was buried slowly by falling ash. They pointed out that remnants of people were found, right in the middle of doing things, but didn't realize this contradicted the burying being slow. It's now thought that it was buried very quickly by pyroclastic flows, superheated gas traveling over 200 miles per hour. Oh no, ash is falling like rain. I better strike a pose lifting this hammer so I'll look cool when they dig up my body. A blacksmith in Pompei? Probably. Kinda makes you wonder about that guy that had apparently been self-pleasuring at the time. I'm seeing Pompei in 2.5 weeks with my brother, and he has been explicit that we will be visiting the grave of Wonking Man. The museum with the erotica closes earlier than everything else, so go there first and 100% read up on everything and plan what to see. Germany would never reunite, the French would never allow it. I remember visiting my brother and his wife in 1987 and unification still being very controversial. Late 90s computer class will never have terabyte hard drives in our lifetime, or a need for that much data. Heh, now you can get terabyte micro SD cards, wild. I remember buying a 7.4 gigabytes hard drive and thinking I'd never run out of space on that thing. My pictures folder has 73 gigabytes in it now. I will never forget buying 32 MB of RAM and a 1.7 GB hard drive for just over $1. 700 Canadian in about 1996 or 97 and thinking that would be the last hard drive I ever needed. Unless it failed, I just bought 4x1 6 TB hard drives this weekend for Inez. A 512 kilobits flash drive was $40 in 2004. And not having to write a CD for a PowerPoint was so cool, but remember, always right-click. Eject device, and X to OOB, you can get a TB for $20 today. 2000X the memory, 12 the price. 20 years is wild. I think a TB is to million X the memory of 512 kilobits, but it's late and I'm tired. Writing CDs was lame. Zip disk for life. Blood is blue until exposed to oxygen. This one triggers me. I had an old lady teaching my 6th grade science class that sent me to detention for arguing with her when she said the blood in your veins was blue but red in your arteries. To be fair, I argued with her on a lot of things she was wrong about, but this is the only one that resulted in detention. That's the only time I can remember my dad, a chemist, actually go to the school to confront a teacher for being wrong. Incidentally, she also counted off on a test because I said sound was one of the senses. She wanted hearing. I said you sense a taste, you sense a sight, you sense a smell, and you sense a touch. So why don't you sense a sound? That argument lasted several days, but she did give me my points back. God help me. I assume everyone who believed this took anatomy textbooks literally when they color the venous system blue to show deoxygenated blood moving back to the heart. It was just meant to be a way to differentiate it from the arterial system for kids learning about the body. But grown-arse adults thinking half our circulatory system is blue is just wild. I sorta get it, veins do tend to look blue through white skin. Except it's just that it's better at reflecting blue light. Hence why it looks blue. Deoxygenated blood is just kinda darker red, though, and if you have carbon monoxide poisoning, your blood will be a brilliant cherry-red color. That one's forever stuck in my head since reading the excellent Poisoner's Handbook about the team of NYC's first medical examiner and the father of forensic toxicology. Everyone who got killed in campy 1970s horror movies had carbon monoxide poisoning. That you're gonna end up working a minimum wage job if you don't go to college. You went to college and ended up working a minimum wage job ? Or didn't go to college and make more than many college graduates. I make more doing carpentry for a small local company than my two friends who graduated college. One works at a rehab facility and one works as a counselor for AD children. Both jobs are a great service to their patients and both are IMO. Very, very important. But they are darn sure not late enough. I understand my body gets beat up pretty bad, especially as the years go by, and it's hard work. But it's not that bad, and it's a great group of guys, and we can do dislike where we like within reason as long as we get the job done and don't have to deal with many people. It's got its downsides, but I barely graduated high school, and it was a way out of poverty for me. Not that I'm anywhere near safe. I'm one serious injury away from being F-ed, but so are most people. I would make it for S little bit. But it wouldn't be all too long before things got ugly if my income stopped long term. Again, this is true for most people, but the likelihood of hurting yourself or developing debilitating Injuries after a few decades of daily 75 physical work is higher than most jobs. The work definitely takes a toll when the years start to add up. In your 20s, you're good. Early 30s are okay. It's about 35 I've noticed where things start to become injured or chronically painful. But I am able to give my son and wife a decent life. I went the college route and got a cushy white-collar job. My brother went the trade route and got a blue-collar job. At 30 years old, we both had the same salary. At 40 years old, I make double what he does and his back hurts every day. He loves his work, but I worry about him. Playing with computers is a waste of time and won't lead to a career, said to me by a very old and bitter teacher, 25 years in IT and counting. Yeah, I still remember my sister's boyfriend being like, "Why do you spend all your time on the computer? That'll never go anywhere. I can get a job from this. Why do you waste all your time on skateboards? I can get a job skateboarding narrator." He couldn't. I was waiting for the plot twist that your sister's boyfriend was Tony Hawk. He thought he was. The number and frequency of broken bones disagreed. He grew up to be less of a F-wit, though. Depending on the source, Tony Hawk has broken around 20-40 bones. The clitoris is external genitalia. It is more like an iceberg, with most of it being internal with just a bit poking up the top. I did not learn anything about the clitoris in school. I learned about it, like all men of my generation, from pomags found in the woods. I grew up in the city. We had to find our playboys under a moldering mattress in an alley. Not many places for Johnny Pomag to plant his seeds in the city. Gotta make do somehow. Johnny Fapple seed, you mean? Glass is actually a liquid, which is why old windows look droopy. I was definitely in my 20s before I learned that wasn't true. It's actually a pretty interesting rabbit hole to go down if you're interested in that sort of thing. Obviously, the window thing has been debunked, but glass has quite an interesting structure that I understand absolutely nothing about. The truth is, few materials fit nicely into the little boxes we are taught about. When you start diving into it, you find all these weird little quirks that cause things to work just slightly off. That's true for most subjects. We're taught a generalized, simplified version of things. But as your knowledge of a topic becomes more specialized, you understand how often there are exceptions to the rules. I before E except after C. Effing bullshit when you want to pull a feisty heist on your foreign beige neighbors. Weird. I have always enjoyed that this one is an exception. Why doesn't this one follow the rule? Because it's weird. I was always taught Mississippi's secession from the Union in the Civil War was to preserve states' right to be independent and nothing at all to do with slavery. That Confederate heritage was about family and not prejudice. Slavery is mentioned in the very first sentence of the first paragraph of the Letter of Secession. As the primary reason, they decided if they couldn't own humans anymore, it would crash the economy. The crazy thing is, owning slaves was actually wrecking their economy. The North was booming because of labor saving, production, increasing machinery, and innovations that came with the Industrial Revolution. But South didn't trust slaves around expensive machinery because of how easily it could be sabotaged. So they were stuck with an agrarian economy. No. Well, I agree with the opening sentence, but then it goes awry. 1. The North was very agrarian. The whole country was. The relevant difference here is the independent farmer North versus the big plantation South. 60% of the land in the North was owned by the yeoman farmers. 90% of the land in the South was owned by the 2% of the population that was the land-owning elite. To the cotton gin was a major labor-saving, production-increasing machine. It was used all over the South, as were all kinds of other new technology. Ironically, this labor-saving device actually increased the demand for slaves. More cotton could be processed in the textile mills, so they wanted more labor to pick more cotton. Yeah, before cotton gin, only 5 states had more than 100. 0 slaves, and total population is debated, but around 690. It was going out, and since importation was banned by 1800, it was set to die. After the invention in 1792 made it way more popular, and it went to 11 states and for million total slaves, or 7% of U.S. population. And by to OOB, cotton gin really effed with U.S.'s progress. But that's today. Profits over people every time. Note, not equating chattel slavery to $7.25 an hour in 2023. It's not nearly the same thing, but it still sucks. Ironically, the inventor felt bad for the slaves and invented it to make their lives better.